Welcome everybody. It is Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Looking out the window, there's commerce everywhere outside the window. They're fixing a sidewalk that's been dilapidated for about the last 3 weeks. And there's a crane across the street putting up some, heating units on the roof. So lots of commerce going on here. That's why we like it on Business Monday. I'm Josh Fenton. He's the money man, Gary Sass, head of the Hassenfeld Institute up at Bryant University, and 17 or 18 other cool titles that the money man has. We're here to talk about, we're going to talk bond issues. First up, 3 big bond issues. One of them, a really big bond issue. Question 1, $250 million to help fix the infrastructure of public school buildings around the state. Your thoughts on $250 million? Is it the biggest question ever put before the voters?
I don't know that, but if it's not, it's certainly one of the biggest.
I think it is.
I can remember back in 1977 when I did the staff work for the Narragansett, before the Narragansett Bay Commission was formed, and we proposed an $80 or $90 million bond issue to begin to fix up the combined sewer overflows and clean up the bay, and at that time people thought we were nuts, but it was a good investment. So this is $250 million, but it's not the only $250 million. In 5 years they intend to ask for another $250 million. It's going to be available, as you say, to fix up schools, to deal with environmental issues, health and safety issues, to deal with career and technical education, to provide space for early childhood development. It's really a potpourri of anything the communities feel they need to do to improve their fiscal plans. A portion of it will be given to all communities. People were concerned that a disproportionate amount would go to certain communities that had big needs, but the bond language is such where it'll be proportionally divided. The cost of the issue is a $250 million issue, but the real cost of it is about $400 million when you add in the interest and the issuance charges. This is a classic case of paying for neglect. We let our school buildings go down to neglect. We had a moratorium on school construction when things were bad back around 2006, where we probably missed spending about $600 million over that period to match local contributions for school construction. So it's really hard to think anything but positive thoughts about this issue.
So here's my question. A Blue Ribbon Commission came out with a report about a year ago, I want to say, and the Blue Ribbon report said that the need in the state was about $2.2 billion. It also probably underestimated, and that's a year or two ago that report came out. It's probably $2.4 billion and counting. You look at some of the schools in Providence that they said you could rehab when it really raises some questions if they needed to be replaced. I think Classical High School is on the list for rehab around $30 million. And the cost of replacing it was listed at $80 million. You look over in Fall River, the cost of replacing Durfee High School, a similar size institution, is now pushing up towards $300 million. Is bonding every 5 years really going to do much of anything, or do we really need a longer-term, consistent, annualized funding source to be able to grapple with this problem at all?
Well, there are 3 parts to that question, 3 answers. The first is, do we have the appropriate governance structure? And I would argue that depending upon local communities to initiate capital projects and then match based on their need, because the state match is about 35% for the wealthiest communities, it's over 90% for the poorest communities. It really is a very diffuse way of doing it. And we probably ought to look in the future, not now, but the next governor, at a school building authority, and look at the kind of creative financing authority we can give to a school building authority. So we have governance issues, and our governance model is probably more 19th century than it was 20th century. So that's an issue. The second issue is you have to balance what you can afford with what you need. And so when looking at affordability, there are a couple of very basic metrics that are used, and you have to think about them. And you also have to think about what are some of our other needs for environment, for higher education, for roads. It's not all schools. And there are two metrics that most people use, certainly used by the credit rating agencies and used in the state by the Public Finance Management Board. One is debt service as a percentage of general revenue. And at the risk of boring people, it's pretty simple. The target is that your debt service as a percent of general revenue never should exceed 7%.
Okay.
Okay. And so we're around 6.2, 6.3, depending upon how you measure it. Well, we're not at 7 yet. We have a little bit of room, but you have to recognize that, and you can't go hog wild.
Right.
The second measurement is debt as a percentage of wealth of the state, and they measure wealth by personal income. And the target number is that your debt never should exceed 4% of the income of the citizens and the businesses of a state. Well, we're getting a little bit close to that. We're about 3.2, 3.4%. And so, and the second ratio means that we can afford these issues, but we have to be concerned about affordability. These are two measures, and so there's a governance question, there's an affordability question, and so I think on balance, I think you're looking at public policy. I think we're doing about what we can.
But if you've got $2.2 billion in need, which if you extrapolate what other high schools are costing in other nearby locations, is a wild underestimate. And look at it of putting $250 million into projects plus the local matches, call it $500 million. You're just going to end up in the next decade not really getting anywhere. You're just going to continue to fall behind just at a slightly slower pace. And do you end up with roads and bridges situation where you're 50th in the country and you've got the worst school infrastructures in America?
Well, I don't have a good answer to it because clearly we need to invest in facility more than we have, but there are two responses I would give to that. The first is that we need a strategy. The state, I hate to say, doesn't have an education strategy. Well, certainly meeting all your capital needs follows that strategy.
Right.
So, should we have consolidated high schools? Should we have more magnet schools? And so before you put $2 billion into something, it'd be more magnet schools. And so before you put $2 billion into something, it'd be pretty good to have a strategy. The second issue is you've got to deal with the basic blocking and tackling. And some of our have a strategy. The second issue is you've got to deal with the basic blocking and tackling. And some of our buildings are in awful shape. They're not environmentally sound for kids and teachers to be in.
Right.
They're not safe. And we certainly awful shape. They're not environmentally sound for kids and teachers to be in.
Right.
They're not safe. And we certainly haven't invested enough in career and technical facilities. So this money, and which will be over 5 years, facilities. So this money, and which will be over 5 years. We should mention this. We should mention this too. That kind of puts it more into perspective. It's $250 million, but it can't be spent over 5 years, and you can't spend more. That kind of puts it more into perspective. It's $250 million, but it can't be spent over 5 years, and you can't spend more than $100 million a year from that pot of money. Really is year from that pot of money. You catch up. It's playing basic blocking and tackling.
Are we misleading, though, the voters? I've heard some of the narrative from the governor that this $250 million is a game changer. It's less than, it's around 8% of an underestimation of what the need is.
It's not a game changer. What it's basically saying is a kid is not going to sit in a school building.
That's my argument. Is that 250? You can't fix Mount Pleasant High School, Central, and Classical for $250 million.
No, but you can fix classrooms where a kid is not, where the boiler system doesn't have the temperature at 75 degrees, in the month of May when it's 95 degrees.
Let me double back on another issue. Are we fixing things that are just simply outdated? Why aren't we building technology schools? We know that the future, all these schools should be wireless. All these schools should be state of the art, if we're going to go in and spend 30, 40, 50 million dollars in an individual location, and we're making it, what's the standard, safe, dry, and
What's more than that?
safe, dry, and clean blackboards?
A town can use some of that money for career and technical education. The point, being this, good. Perfect shouldn't be the enemy of good. However, the saying is, we have schools that are not safe. We have schools that are not environmentally sound. We haven't made a proper investment in some districts in career and technical education. I can go on and on and on. And so to have a discussion that this is not the best thought out, the best plan is true, but then you have to come back to the question, recognizing everything you've said, is the $250 million, which will be spent over 5 years, a good investment? I would argue it's a necessary investment to do some basic things because our schools have gotten into such disrepair. Now, for the politicians to sell this as a game changer, they can sell people a bridge in Arizona over a river if they want to. But it's really making certain that.
Listen, I'm in full agreement that it's a no-brainer that this has got to be approved by voters, but I also think that this is just the very beginning of a long, painful funding strategy that's got to be developed by the state to be able to meet the needs. And the infrastructure of these schools, the condition which they're in, that you're asking students and teachers to work in, it's inferior.
Well, but put it in context. To do what you're suggesting and make the $2 billion investment, if that in fact is the need, requires a strategy. You've got to know what the system's going to look like. It requires a new way of funding, not new tax sources, but a governance structure where you have a school building authority that can do creative financing and recognize the proper division of responsibility between the locals and the state. And it requires an awareness of what you can afford to do. Some of the metrics I mentioned before, it doesn't do you much good if you exceed your affordability metrics and your credit rating goes to hell in a handbasket. So those are the three things you have to balance. What this proposal is saying, as I read it, is things that have gotten, in terms of school infrastructure, in terms of school facilities, things have gotten so bad that we need to spend $250 million to play catch up over the next 5 years. And it's interesting. It's clearly a 5-year program because in no year can you spend more than $100 million from that pot. So we can have a longer conversation about what we should be doing and what the future looks like. This is basically to deal with some problems that exist here and now and are not likely to change. And then the question becomes, well, if we decide later on that we should have a different configuration, would this money be wasted? And the answer is most of it not wasted because of the condition our schools are in.
So let me ask you a question. Some of the other cities around the country, whether it's in Ohio with LeBron James pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars of his own money into education, Mark Zuckerberg, when you have a nickname like the Money Man, don't you have an obligation to pour, let's not say you're quite in the Zuckerberg range, but maybe 50 million of the SAS empire's resources into matching some of these school improvement projects?
Well, I have a lot of kids, and so they'll have to.
And they're all wildly successful and wealthy too.
and I have a lot of grandkids and great grandkids, so they're going to have a meeting one of these days and vote on what they'd like to do.
Let's go to question 2 on the ballot coming up in 2 weeks from tomorrow. It's $70 million for higher education. It's a series of projects across the different public universities. What's your thought on that $70 million?
Again, this is a no-brainer because it's really 2 projects. It's not a whole series of projects. It's about $45 million for URI, and it's for the Narragansett Bay campus.
Yeah.
It's for the design to renovate and to construct new facilities. An Ocean Tech Center building. That's a major calling card of the university, our oceanography programs. And this is a good investment to build on the strength of the university and strengthen Narragansett Bay campus. So I think that $45 million is going to be around for a long time, and building on its strength is both good educationally and both good for the economy. The second project is $25 million for Rick. It's interesting, we can't give one university something without giving it
Right.
something to the other. And it's a much less ambitious project. That's a project to renovate the Horace Mann building, which I believe houses the School of Education and Human Development. I had a year's appointment up there as a visiting professor. Horace Mann's in bad shape.
Yeah.
If you're going to use it, you need to fix it. And so that's the 75 million for those two. The total cost, when you add the interest and the issuance cost, will be over $112 million. So it's not an insignificant amount of money.
It's a big project.
Yeah, but it's you some of the discussion you had before about investments in capital. Look around the country at what some of our other universities are investing
So
in.
other university and colleges, are they also dependent on state bond issues to be able to do rehabs and expansions of their
Most are.
campuses?
They're not dependent if there's a fee involved and it's a enterprise type fund, but they depend on public financing to a large degree. But the facilities, particularly at URI, I'm more interested in what we're investing in a flagship school. And if you look at the facilities of other flagship state universities, look what stores looked like 30 years ago. Go to stores now at
Yeah.
UConn and see what they've invested. Go to other public universities that are built on the Midwest model or the Southern model. They've invested.
Land-grant
The other land grant
universities.
universities, their facilities, they've invested a lot more in facilities than we have, and this is a targeted investment. This is an investment in giving the right infrastructure, right physical infrastructure to oceanography, which needs to be a major program. The university is well recognized, in that.
As a national
Right.
leader. Primarily a graduate program, though.
Exactly, but that's important. I don't want to distinguish, and that's a hell of a lot different than saying we want $45 million to build a facility to start a new program. Then we can have a different conversation. This is a bread and butter professional program that a university has that's very competitive nationally, and providing facilities to deliver that program is an important investment for the state, I think.
The third one, a little bit more of environmental bonds and a few other things.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm even voting for the third one. And
Walk us through the third.
well, the third one it's a kind of a grab bag.
Is that its official title?
No.
Is it deemed on the state ballot the grab bag?
Well,
Question 3,
I'd
grab bag?
call it the grab bag. They're all good projects.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. The title on the state ballot is a $47 million investment in green economy and clean water. So there are all kinds of very good projects in there. They're projects for recreation space, open space. They're projects to invest in clean water in the revolving fund. There are 10 different projects included in that group, and there's probably not a project that anybody should object to, possibly with some of the land purchases or the open space, and because it's not clear that we've been used to what we've had in that program. But by and large, of the 10 programs that are included there, they're policy-wise are fine, and the things taxpayers should support. Then you begin to look at the program, and you're being asked two things. You're being asked, number one, to vote $47 million in debt for 10 different programs.
Right.
And when I see that, I see some of those programs are a $2 million expenditure or a $4 million expenditure, then you have to ask the question as a fiscal conservative, and also a question about priorities. Why aren't we doing pay-go for small projects?
Yeah.
And why are we paying that project?
In other words, paying it out of the annual budget of the
or,
state.
or we have a special capital fund
Yeah.
that we could pay it from. After we fully fund the rainy day fund, there's additional capital money. There are options to use, and so that bond issue is about $47 million with interest. It's about $80 million, and there are a series of small projects. So no one would argue for a minute that you could do pay-go on a $250 million project to fix schools. no one would argue for a minute that you should do pay-go on a $45 million project to rebuild the Narragansett Bay campus.
Unless you had a dedicated resource,
Yeah,
revenue source.
but this and the point and the point, even if you had a dedicated revenue source, you just think of how much more you could buy if you weren't paying 5% interest for 20 years on some big numbers. So when you see 10 different projects and you compare them to the first and second question, which are clearly distinguishable activities, and you understand the purpose, then I scratched my head. I said, why couldn't some of this be pay-go? What's the politics of putting all the green economy and the clean water together in one bond issue? When you look at our debt metrics, as I've said before, we still have room, but why use the room on $2 million projects as opposed to investing a lot more in big projects? So it's not to me, that bond issue is not a question of the inappropriateness of the expenditure. The expenditures are fine. It's the method of financing, and it's the grab bag. It's putting 10 projects, all of which have different. Now the politics is interesting. So you have open space constituency, you got farm constituency, you got clean water constituencies. You have all these constituencies, and you get to vote for the.
So you're down on 3 from a philosophical standpoint. Let's talk about the overall spend. 250, which I really do think that's the biggest nut ever put before the voters, plus 70, plus 47 roughly, about pushing 360, 370 million dollars. It's the biggest year, I think, collectively ever put in front of the voters.
Well, I'm not sure that's the case, but the big figure is this: it's 600. If these issues pass, and I look at both principal and the interest.
Yeah.
Taxpayers are obligating themselves to $600 million in debt payments. I think you can make a very strong case for 1 and 2. I think 1 is because of the past sins. I think 2 is a good investment in higher education. 3 has a lot of good projects, but I'm questioning why we're financing some of those projects with debt. If you put words in my mouth about question 3, the question is not about the appropriateness of those projects. They're all appropriate. The question is, should we be financing projects of that size with debt? And that's a fiscal opinion.
So collectively, though, just to go back to it, is this a worrisome number, the total amount being put before the voters?
Well, no, it's not, because as I mentioned earlier,
you're still staying under the respective 7%, 4%.
Debt is a percentage of general revenue, and debt is a percentage of personal income. We're well within those targets. Now, the concern is what bond issues are put on the ballot in the future. See, the numbers I've just mentioned stay within those targets, but if we allow debt in the future to increase at a faster rate than income, or take a larger portion of state spending, then it becomes a problem. But these per se are affordable. They stay within the metrics, the measurements, the targets we use, but you can't isolate them from future decisions. Also, another thing we haven't spoken about is that net tax-supported debt. That's our GO debt. That's not deficit, which is about 1.8 billion right now. If we did nothing else, would probably decline by 120 million over the next 5 years. Now that's not going to be the case, because that's a kind of hypothetical. It's a wish number. That basically says we do no other debt going forward. We're going to do debt, but if we keep our tax supported debt to about 1.8, 1.9 billion, we're fine. If we start to get above that number, you have to be concerned. And so I don't know what's in the capital program, what's going to go forward in the future. But just taking the snapshot and comparing this snapshot, which is the 3 questions, to our debt capabilities, I think
You're comfortable
I'm
with these
comfortable.
numbers.
There one other number I should mention, which I'm less comfortable with, but when you compare Rhode Island's debt to other states, it's high, and that's true of the Northeast. So when you look at your median debt service to revenue, the national ratio is about 4%. Rhode Island's is about 6%. I mentioned that before.
Yeah.
We're in 12th. When you look nationally at debt to personal income, the ratio is about 2.5% nationally.
And we're at about 3.2.
Yeah, we're gonna, but based on how Moody's does it, we're about 3.5, or a little bit above that. So we're a high debt state, and that always has to be, something that you think about as you assume additional debt and you compare it to what you retire. But the education issues to me are no, given everything I've said and looking at the thing on balance, the education issues are no-brainers. The clean, the green, and the environmental issues are good projects, but there is a question of why do you have 10 projects, some very small, that you should be paying out of PAYGO is part of a bond issue.
After, let's say, I think John Del Volpe's poll in June looked at the popularity, the approval rating of the $250 million bond. I want to say it was 80-20 or something like that. It might have been 70-30, but overwhelming support for it. Assuming that this passes 2 weeks from tomorrow on Election Day, should we go into the mode of really starting to explore what a permanent source of funding is, of a standardized revenue stream to be able to fund the improvements to the education infrastructure and get out of this feast, famine, mega bond when it's good, skip a decade or two when things are bad, and develop into a more sophisticated structure?
Absolutely. We have to, but you also have to look at what the capacity is to undertake these repairs and renovations. And this is an interesting, conversation about affordability and getting the biggest bang for the taxpayers. So this is an extraneous issue I'm going to bring up, but it makes my point. So I look around and I see that we're spending a lot of money to subsidize the buildings of hotels and apartment houses for rich people. Now, when I am a local school district, or I am a Department of Rhode Island University, and I'm bidding up against these people, and so in terms of costs for my projects, to me, it's much more important that we adequately provide good educational facilities, and it's also important that we do it in an affordable way, which means keeping the cost as low as possible. And then I look at some of the public policy of the trades, building things that are not directly but indirectly may have an effect on my costs. I scratch my head and say, who's the engineer of the railroad?
I got that project over there. That's historic, federal and state. That and some rebuild money directly out the window. That's historic. Tax credits, federal and state. I don't know if there's rebuild money in that project. Tonight, before the City of Providence Ordinance Committee, is the Fane Tower revised, excuse me, up for consideration again. There's certainly some complexity in where our resources are going and how we're encouraging development.
And that's what the leadership's about. But I think in terms of education, to answer your question directly, I think the issue should pass, the major education issues. I think they will pass. But then we have to recognize that we're doing this because of deficiencies in plant. But then we need to have an education strategy. We need to talk about a governance structure, whether it's my idea of a public education building authority or a better idea or something else. And so,
listen, I'm with all your ideas. The Bill of Rights has got the highest approval rating of just about any idea ever floated in the state of Rhode Island.
Part of the Bill of Rights dealt with
absolutely
plant. But I think, Jan, to answer your question in a serious way, we need the strategy to know where we're going, and then we need a governance structure, which is governance/finance, because what we're doing right now will not guarantee that you won't have a roller coaster funding program. And because of the roller coaster nature of the funding program, which is no one's fault, we got into the position we're in, and we have to spend $250 to catch up, not invest in the highest tech kind of facilities.
You're a smart guy. You not only play in Rhode Island, but you play at the national level with some advisory roles to some members of Congress. Let's just take a quick dip into DC waters. CNN's newest poll that came out this morning said that President Trump's approval rating is at a record high, 47%.
It's exactly, who had a 47% approval rating 20 months into their administration?
Barack Obama.
Exactly.
And he lost 63
seats.
In the House. What's going to happen in 2 weeks at the House level? Are we going to see a big Democratic win in the House? And are we going to see them edge out the Republicans in the Senate? Let's start in the House.
Well-
What's going to happen in the House of Representatives
Well, I
down in
think,
D.C.?
see, I think you have, it's a nationalized election, with the House. And I look at this point for the Democrats to pick up about 40 seats in the House. And since there's a 23, I think, Republican majority right now, it should flip. The thing that is very interesting about the flip is the women vote in the polling I've been seeing is just so strong against Trump that should have a big impact on the House races. On the other side, it's a tough thing to call because, even with all the elites on the East Coast and the West Coast, there is a country, I can tell people, but when you get west of the Hudson River and east of the Rocky Mountain, there's a country out there.
Yeah.
And the country doesn't always think like we on the coast think. And so the caravan, Kavanaugh, good economy, is playing against the Democratic theme. The Democratic theme has been health. And so Democrats are running on health, and the Republicans fumbling how they dealt with Obamacare. The Republicans are running on immigration and the economy. And I'm not sure how it plays in the middle of the country.
Listen, I would have bet 60 seats flip. I think the president on this mobs versus jobs has got the best catchphrase going of any of the political candidates. And I understand that there's a huge division on health care. But when there's a good economy, health care is not the lightning rod issue as when the economy's not as good. Because people are able to afford it.
Let me take exception to that. When the economy is good, we sometimes pay more attention to other issues. And so health, immigration may get more attention because people are not as anxious about the economy. When the economy is not good, they're very anxious about the economy, and that tends to favor, the party that people believe will help most with the job. So, but the point being, and this is the critical point of this conversation, is it's very fluid right now.
Absolutely.
Common sense and says the Democrats are going to pick up 40 to 50 seats in the House.
Yep.
A lot of it's going to come from just redistricting changes. What happened in Pennsylvania is 5 seats. What's happened in a few other states where the courts have made decisions on gerrymandering. There are about 10 or 15 seats that'll just flip on that basis alone potentially. So it looks like a prudent person would say it looks like a flip. But the wave could be 60 seats and be a big wave, or it could be more a mild wave and have a Democratic.
Senate, before we go?
I think the Republicans are in much better shape. I never thought I'd say this. The Republicans are in shape to pick up some seats in the Senate.
Could pick up 2 seats.
Well, we're gonna, if we hold Texas.
Yeah. North Dakota could be a pickup.
We could pick up, and we hold Arizona, which is very close. Each one of these are based on local issues, and they're really dogfights right now. But there's a potential of picking up North Dakota. There's a potential of holding on to some of the seats that are being challenged. Florida's too close to these places are too close to call right now. We could lose Tennessee. There's a very popular ex-governor who was a moderate conservative Democrat, actually, Phil Bredesen, who some people think is just a more qualified candidate than the Republican candidate. So each one is a story in its own, but the math favors the Republicans to hold their own, or if they lost a seat, then we'd have the Pence Congress. So. But think about that for a second. So you have the House, and they're going to be screaming, and they're going to be holding investigations and driving the White House nuts, and you can have the Senate who'll be confirming all the judges that the White House wants. It'll be a very real dichotomy.
Good for the news business. Gary Sass, thank you as always, the money man, head of the Hassenfeld Institute at Bryant University, and one of the biggest thinkers in Rhode Island. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Small Biz at the 3 o'clock hour was great, looking at the Goldman Sachs 1,000 Small Business Initiative, and of course Gary's insights into the bond issues and where Congress may be going over the next couple of weeks. We'll be back tomorrow. Kate Nagel's got the 4 o'clock hour, and I think she leads off with Jennifer Lawless from the University of Virginia, talking about everything that's going on in DC. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks to Navigant Credit Union for their sponsorship of the newsroom, and our friends over at Deepwater Wind. Josh Fenton, over and out. See you tomorrow at 4 o'clock.